Joe and members, we all know about some of the crisis of literacy in our schools, but perhaps one of the greatest crises we have is not just in the English literacy, but in the literacy in science. As we all know, the performance of Australia, the performance of a lot of Western nations in relation to science, engineering, is lamentable. And it's with this in mind that the South Australian government some years ago established the Royal Institution in Australia, RiAus, which is located in the old Stock Exchange building. And we're here today to hear from the recently appointed Director of the RiAus, Paul Willis, who comes with impeccable credentials. Paul is, as you've seen by the bulletin, is a vertebrate palaeontologist and has in fact, in that capacity, travelled to Antarctic on several occasions. For the last 10 years or so, he's been a regular presenter of the Quantum and Catalyst on ABC television. In fact, was fully engaged as a science journalist with Catalyst, and really took up the challenge to move from Sydney to Adelaide last year to direct the RiAus Centre, which is really an Australian, it's a national centre that's based here in Adelaide. Paul tells me he's delighted to be in Adelaide and delighted to run this national institution from this place. So would you please welcome Paul Willis.
Thanks very much, Stephen. They say that a camera puts on an extra couple of kilos, but I think the aspect ratio here has given me more than a few kilos, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me along to address you today. The Royal Institution of Australia, RiAus, as we like to be known, is a relatively new venture, and it's about engaging Australians with science. How do we not just take ideas out there into Australia, but how do we get Australians actually thinking about those ideas and engaging with them? So it's one thing to put a boffin on a soapbox talking about his favourite subatomic particle. It's something else to get people walking away from that presentation with their life changed by the information they've received. So, in a nutshell, that's what we're up to. There we go. You have to head one. A brief history. The Royal Institution in Great Britain has been going 212 to almost 213 years now. It was originally established by Sir Joseph Banks. People, the likes of Michael Faraday and Davy were all involved with the Royal Institution of Great Britain, including also the Braggs, William Henry and William Lawrence Bragg. William Lawrence actually being born in Adelaide, the youngest ever person to receive a Nobel Prize, which he received with his father in 1915 for physics. He went on to become a director at the Royal Institution in Great Britain. Founded in 1999, it's responsible for 10 elements on the periodic table, including sodium, and 14 Nobel Prizes. We've been going since 2009, where, well, we're working on the Nobel Prize. As for the elements on the periodic table, unfortunately that table is now full. Our genesis came out of the visitation here by Baroness Susan Greenfield as a thinker in residence, and one of her recommendations was that in order to try and encourage a dialogue about science in the Australian community, we should establish the first and so far the only branch or daughter organisation of the Royal Institution in Great Britain. There has been some popular confusion. People say the Royal Institution, the Royal Society. People are familiar with the Royal Society. The easy dichotomy to think is that the Royal Society is about doing science, the Royal Institution is about communicating and engaging with science. So she, through various contacts that she was able to make, including in the state government and in the corporate world, was able to move the idea forward of having a Royal Institution in Australia. We secured the Stock Exchange building between Piring and Grenfell Streets there. Wonderful old Edwardian building built in 1901, which was completely gutted and rebuilt in our image. We've been very lucky really in that half the building had been burnt out twice, once in the 1930s and once in the 1980s. And as a consequence, half the building has been restored to its original condition, and the burnt out half we had a much freer hand, and so we've got all the mod comms in there, and we were able to put in things such as, here it is today in its refurbished state. If you need a pointer as to where we are, there's a map there showing, in case anyone is not sure, where Piring and Grenfell Street are. Inside we have facilities like a 180-seat auditorium that can be configured in any number of ways. It has a bath as part of its functionality. It also has about $3 million worth of audio-visual equipment. And what this means is that this is now effectively an online broadcast television studio. We can record anything that goes on in that space through a 5-camera live mix feed and instantly beam to the world over the internet. So that is a very powerful tool for us to use in our end of taking science to Australia and to the world. We have more formal spaces, our boardroom. I think I have yet to have a serious challenge. It's the best boardroom in the country. It's available for hire if you want to say something special at a board meeting, or if you want to have a special dinner for a group of people. Our boardroom is fast becoming the place to do that. You will always remember being in our boardroom. We actually had a 70-seat dinner for our patron, the Duke of Kent, there earlier this year. It was spectacular. We have, so far as we know, the only dedicated art science gallery space in the country. And it's been incredible to see the way that we've been able to tell people about science and scientific ideas through art, and they didn't realise we were talking about science. And they go home with all sorts of ideas about ecology or mathematics, having appreciated an exhibition of crocheted coral, or our current exhibition of patterns and complexity in mathematics. So we've also got another space which is the performance space. We can actually put in plays there. We recently had an award-winning play, the Sepia, as part of the LA Fringe. So we can do all kinds of different interesting things in the spaces we have. We have historic stuff. We've got a beautiful stained glass window that's actually still is owned by the state gallery. They decided it was better off where it was rather than chiselling it out and taking it across the street. And we have modern office spaces for ourselves, but also the AusSMC. The Australian Science Media Centre is a specialist organisation that also arose out of Baroness Greenfield's residency as a thinker in residence. And they are charged with connecting journalists with scientists and vice versa, so that more science gets into the media and the science that gets there is more accurate. They do a wonderful job, and they are housed just upstairs from us in the old Stock Exchange building, which we now call the Science Exchange. The sorts of things that we get up to in our auditorium, we have public lectures and discussions and all sorts of performances. Each year we have our keynote lectures. Last year we had Andy Thomas, before that we had Fiona Wood, and before that we had Hugh Durham-White, who is a world expert in robotics, and they are geared towards an audience of school children, and they're put in October every year. We support the Assets program, which is a program for bringing Aboriginal children to Australia, to Adelaide, and giving them an intensive 2-week training course in science. One of the results we've got from that is students who've done that course have gone on, 60% of them have gone on to do science at university level. So that's a good result for an Indigenous audience. Free-range science, we reach outside of our building. In this case, free-range science goes right across the state of Victoria. We take science to regional communities throughout the state and engage the local population with all kinds of interesting bits of science. Again, because it's delivered on their doorstep, they're more likely to be able to participate and meet with the scientists who are actually doing world-class research. Spirit is another program where we take children from Adelaide in particular, across South Australia, from underprivileged backgrounds who show an aptitude for science, and we take them to London each year in order to experience the Christmas lectures put on by the Royal Institution of Great Britain. These are, any of you who've lived through a Christmas in England would probably be aware of them being broadcast on the BBC. They are the centrepiece of the performances put on by the Royal Institution in Great Britain. They're always immensely interesting and fun, good enough to put on telly. And so we take students over there to not only participate in that, but also tour around some of the science and cultural institutions like the British Museum of Natural History and the British Museum, etc., across London. Science outside the square, this is where we actually go outside of our building. We've gone across Adelaide, we've gone across the state. Last year we even had a series of Science Outside the Square events that followed the path of the World Solar Challenge, explaining to local people where the science was behind the Solar Challenge. Previous occasions, apparently, most locals stood at the side of the road and watched these cockroach-like vehicles speed by, and that was it. This time round, because we were able to get into the major centres ahead of the race, challenge, you're not allowed to race on the roads, we were able to explain some of the engineering, some of the principles behind it, some of the science behind how these vehicles work to school kids in particular, but also to adult audiences, and people were able to appreciate a bit more than just standing there watching the cars zoom past. In our art gallery space, I told you about the crocheted coral. I have to admit that this is one of the most jaw-droppingly gorgeous exhibitions we've had. It was incredibly popular. We had something like 250 people across Adelaide crocheting up bits of coral and to put that exhibition together. When you walked in there, it just reeked of joy. It was a riot of colour. It was like walking into a set from Yellow Submarine. And because of that initial guttural communication, that engagement, people would stay in that exhibition. The residence time was there like an hour. People were coming in and they would spend an hour in the exhibition. And they'd go away knowing a bit more about problems like coral bleaching, about what happens when you change temperature on a coral reef, what happens when coral reefs are not looked after and you get pollution and plastic involved, and all these kinds of basic ecological problems that are facing coral reefs around the world. People were taking on board without realising it, so I thought we really did a good job there. We have all sorts of other stuff. We have Pi Day, so on the 22nd of the 7th, 2207, that's a good approximation of pi. The Americans tend to have it on the 14th of March, but I always like to remind them that there is no 14th month, and that only the Americans can celebrate Pi Day because of the way they refuse to conform to normality in the way they write their calendar. No offence, by the way. Anyway, so there's Pi Day, we have a book club, we have film clubs. Quite often with the film clubs in particular, we will have the producer or someone involved in the making of the film, or a scientist who is conversant with the subject matter of the film, to actually field questions arising out of those documentaries and films that we show in the film club. All different ways that we can talk about science. Looking at how we reach out to school groups, there's already a lot of programs dealing with school kids directly, and we thought a more effective way for us to be able to do things was provide resources that teachers can access, because there's so many teachers out there who want to teach a bit of science, but they have no training in science. And so we provide these neat little packages which are accessible over the internet, which we actually broadcast through our system, whereby they're able to ask questions of a scientist who's an expert on solar cars, on the square kilometre array, synthetic biology. We did one on forensic science, which was incredibly popular. And we back this up with lesson plans and supplementary material that can be downloaded off the internet to help those teachers do the job of teaching our kids some science. Next week we have the National Young Scientist Forum coming to Adelaide, coming to our building, and this is an initiative that's backed in part by Rotary. You guys helped support the early stages where the students from across Australia are identified as having an interest in science, and they're then there's a whole suite of activities across the country where they're exposed to and encouraged to develop their interest in science. Next week, those guys are coming to our organisation, and in fact, this photograph, you can probably tell by the quality of it, is a couple of years old, and this lad here, Kieran, she's now working for us at the RI, so there's a nice continuity there. Our website is our main portal through which people, particularly outside of Adelaide, are able to access what we do and how we do it. And we have all sorts of stuff there. We have a news service so that there is a continuous feed of science and news stories. We have a very active blogging site on our website where every week I'll be discussing something to do with science, and we have other contributions across the board. There's all sorts of goodies on the RiAus website, and we are developing that as the portal. If you want to know something about science, if you want to know what's happening, you can also engage with our live events through this, because there are event diaries, all of those sorts of features. And really, I see the future for us expanding across the nation as being through our audio-visual content delivered over the internet. And we've put a lot of work since I've been there, since last May, in how we develop our audio-visual material so that it both looks good, it's easy to access. We have interviews with people. This last Danielle, she in fact is the first ambassador of the Assets program, so we have a little interview there that people can watch. We actually have our own YouTube channel, and we have a separate channel on Vimeo, so that all of our audio-visual material is readily archived and accessible. Scimates are very simple explanations of basic scientific ideas and principles. So, like, we have one on nanotechnology, which has proved very popular because so many people actually don't know what nanotechnology is and what it can do. And click on that in 3 minutes, you'll be across it, you'll be ready to start your own startup company in nanotechnology. Our live events, we stream them live across the internet. They are broadcast internationally live. Our last event, we had someone tuning in from the United States to find out about superfractals. The event before that was on issues arising out of the Murray-Darling plant. We actually had someone watching that live in Austria. I can only assume that it was perhaps a spelling mistake. They assumed that the Murray-Darling was somewhere in the Alps, but nonetheless, they were able to follow live what was happening on our stage there in the centre of Adelaide and participate. They were able to ask questions if they wished via Twitter that we could have asked of the experts on stage. So it really is a powerful tool for being able to reach out across the nation and around the world. Some brief oversight as to our overall objectives. We aim to engage, influence and educate. We, as I stressed earlier, we're beyond science communication. We don't just want to tell the world about science, we want to infuse them, we want them to engage, we want them to pick up on those ideas and work out how it relates to their lives. Never before in history has our lives been so dependent on the fruits of science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And perversely, never before in the history of humanity has most of the populace known so little about science and how things around them work. There are some statistics which show that the more informed a population is, the more chance they have of making proper, rational decisions that will affect their life if they are exposed to the information of science that can help them form those opinions. Coordinate and collaborate, it's important in an area like science communication across Australia. There are already other players like the CSIRO, like Questacon, like the Australian Academy of Science. And it's important that rather than try and divide up the turf and have fights and compete with everybody, we're actually going to achieve a lot more by working together. And we are in the process of working out who and how we can collaborate with a number of different parties. And that approach is actually paying dividends already. Financial independence. That was a photograph of a Delhi penguin I took on one of my Antarctic trips. And it seemed to speak to me about independence in its entirety. What you can't see is that just up here, there's about another 2,000 of them.
He's a leader.
He's a loner. But previously in Australia, the idea of communicating science has been seen to be something that's a government responsibility, either directly or the government funding other institutions to go out and do this communication work. We are taking a more corporate approach. There are no greater beneficiaries of a scientifically literate population than the corporates of Australia, because a scientifically literate population will provide better quality graduates and employees. It will provide the next generation of geologists, of biologists, of engineers and of technologists and mathematicians that will make those companies run. And so therefore we're looking at how we can engage with corporate Australia to fund us on this important work. Finding new ways to communicate science. This is actually a lot of fun. As I've already outlined, the fact that we can take people crocheting up bits of coral and explain important science, I think that's a fantastic new way. It's what I call the Sultana Iran approach. Don't tell them it's science and they will eat it by the boxful. The number of times it simply comes down to, if you provide an opportunity for people to engage with science, they will take that opportunity and they will benefit from it. I probably chose the wrong picture here. This is actually the Atacama Desert, the world's most lifeless place in Chile. But we think that it's important through things like PD Plus to support science education directly. And science education we need to look at not just on the level of students, school children, even going to universities, but also adults. Let's face it, we all could learn something, and most of us are not shy of learning if it's presented in a non-threatening way. We also see that we have a role in helping to shape science policy across Australia, and we do that through the collaborations that we do with various other organisations, as well as the blogging that we do tends to look at advocating or analysing various positions and helping to formulate those positions in science. So, in a very tight nutshell, that is who the RiAus is and what we get up to. As I've mentioned, we are looking at being financially independent. We do depend on the involvement of the Australian society as a whole, corporate Australia. Anybody who recognises that it's important that we talk about science, that we deliver science to the populace, needs to talk to us and needs to back us. We do have various levels of membership, from individual membership through corporate membership. We have all sorts of, most of our programs are available to be sponsored. We also take donations and have full tax deductible status. So please, in your life within Rotary and outside of Rotary do consider that this is a cause that's well worth supporting, and we would love to hear from you. And above all, being Adelaideans, we'd love to see you down there sometime. We put on a good show regularly, it's entertaining, it's a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing you sometime at the Science Exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, to inform us about a building and an initiative that I think many of us didn't know very much about. So I wonder if I've got a few more minutes. Is there any questions, Paul? Ollie.
Thanks very much, Paul. I have to agree with everything you've said. This club is very interested in promoting science and engineering, the STEM subjects as they're called, to the point that we are managers of the South Australian version of the Science and Engineering Challenge out of the University of Newcastle, which you know all about, I'm sure. Last year, the RiAus was kind enough to join us and to make a donation to us. It was $2,500, and we're very, very grateful for that. Now, we know that you like to be on the receiving end rather than the giving end, but is there any chance of doubling it this year? There's a threat to the funding of the Newcastle University's program.
Yeah.
I mean, we get 2,500 young year 9 and 10 students, and we show them that there's a career in science and engineering, and I'm afraid the media, I think, let us down very badly, and I'd like to see that little part of your organisation do a little better for the advertiser, because they sort of focus on showbiz and stuff.
Yeah.
Science and engineering.
I couldn't agree more. I'm well aware of our association with the Science and Engineering Challenge, and I was out there at the finals that were on the Belladrome last year. Look, it's a wonderful initiative, and we are committed to support whoever does good stuff. Of course, as with everybody else, our dollars can only go so far. I hope that we are in a position to maintain that relationship.
We've got our letter into it.
You've got your letter into it, okay, great. Did you receive mine?
Thank you. Well done, Paul. Years ago, many will remember there was a show of an American scientist called Judy Miller. I think the title of the show was Why Is It So? I may not be quite right in that.
That's right.
That was the thrust of it. And that engrossed me as a child. In fact, the only subject of which I was any good was, in fact, physics. And I think that was partly because of that show. In terms of driving science to people, could some show like that be run out of your organisation?
It's funny you should ask that, because my little bloke, he's only 6 now, but like when he was 3 and 4, he showed an interest, already started showing an interest in physical sciences and engineering and that sort of stuff. He's currently making electronic circuits, and I can't figure out how they work, which is very annoying when he's 6. But when he was about 3 and a half, we realised that we could actually access some of the old Julius Sumner Miller stuff through the ABC, pirate it to DVD and take it home for him to watch. He loved it, but Julius Sumner Miller would not be allowed to get away with that on television today, because it was absolutely terrifying for those kids. He would drill, and quite rightly so, you know, most of them were just being slack, but he would drive home his lessons with a rigour that wouldn't work on television today. Yes, there is room for delivery, not of that specific way of presenting science to young people, but there's certainly room on television and in the media for doing that. There is some of it on television at the moment. Totally Wild has been going for several years, or decades now, and that's squarely aimed at kids. And there are a couple of kids' science programs on ABC2 as well. Should the RiAus look at producing? I tell you what, you stump up the money, would gladly do it. You know, yes, it is something that can be done. It's a matter of we need to prioritise what we can do according to the funding and roll that out.
Okay, Ralph.
Do you have a program of activities at the Science Exchange?
We do indeed. We have every quarter we bring out a program of activities and make that readily available. Would it be of use if we were to make some available to the Rotary Club so that people could participate? And also, all of our programs and activities are viewable online. So you can go to our Eventbrite booking capacity and you can see what's coming up and find out how to get involved that way.
Okay, well, members, I think we've been treated to a very informative and entertaining presentation on this fantastic initiative that is that I think everyone would wish Paul and his team the very best. It's an area, obviously, where there's going to have to be some relationship with this club, and that might be something that Ollie might want to talk to Paul about privately. In a slightly more sophisticated approach than you used. But Robin obviously is going to be prepared to fund the Southern Mill route. So there's lots of possibilities here. Would you please show Paul your appreciation?
Always go analog. Thank you.